All right, good evening, everyone. We have it. Okay, perfect. Had to switch gears a little bit there, technology. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a huge honor to be here. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about A Tale of Two Sharks, and just a fun pun there. Who doesn't love a pun? And in addition, I'd like to get started by thanking all of the organizers, the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, the Gills Club, for getting me here from Townsville, which John mentioned. I come from Australia. That's in northern Queensland, and that's where I'm based at the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for Coral Reef Studies, which is a mouthful, but that's at James Cook University. And I've had and currently have just the most amazing team that makes up the Rummer Lab. And so it's quite fitting for me to also kick off by acknowledging my team of undergraduate and graduate students and technicians and postdocs. Currently and over the years, they are truly my pride and joy. And some of the research I'll be mentioning here in my talk. And I also want to point out to you that females are most certainly well represented in my team, nearly 2/3 over the past 6 years. And what we really need to focus on now, I think, is making sure that they keep being the face and voice of today's shark and fish science around the world. And finally, I'd like to highlight Carolyn Wheeler, who's doing her PhD with me, but she's actually based right here in Boston doing her research at the aquarium on a shark species I'll be talking about. And so without further ado, I'd like to talk a little bit about the focus of my research program and the Rummer Lab. So to understand the different ways that fish, including sharks, can adjust and adapt to human-induced and environmental stress is really the focus of my research program. And while I'm mostly based in Australia and the Pacific Islands now, while I'm visiting here in Boston, I'm actually a bit closer to my original home. I grew up in Illinois, right in the middle of the US, surrounded by cornfields, no sharks in sight. And this is literally my parents' backyard. And so I always get that question, like, how did you get from there to what you're doing now? And questions like, did you always want to be a marine biologist, or more specifically, research stress in fish and sharks? And in hindsight, I think I really did. And this photo was taken when I was about 6 or 7 years old and really sort of epitomizes my childhood. Today, I look at that fish and I think, wow, it's probably too small for me to be touching that fish. And I'm holding it out of the water. And however long it took my dad to take that photo is probably doing a number on its stress response. And so, my brain's going pretty crazy with that photo. So that leads me to, how do I investigate stress in sharks and in fish? I'm a physiologist by training, and my interests are metabolism and respiratory and cardiac function and blood flow, and I've often been called the fish vampire or the shark vampire. I do a lot with the blood, and so I often also refer to the sharks and the other fishes that I study as athletes. Many of our ideas around stress and performance are similar to what we try to investigate in human athletes, and actually, fish and sharks are much better athletes and much better performers than humans anyway. But in terms of stress, they surely are taking a hit. Today we know that the greatest threat to the oceans and the amazing athletes that are swimming in those oceans is human-caused global climate change. We know that this is coming from an increase in carbon emissions into the atmosphere, which is warming and acidifying the oceans. And the increase in industrial and in agricultural pollution is degrading water quality by increasing sediment loads and destroying crucial habitats. Today we're changing our oceans at a rate faster than has ever been documented in human history. And these are the issues that my team and I have been addressing in our research on sharks and other fishes, and especially in the tropics, where we think some of these ecosystems will be most heavily affected. So let me take you back to Australia, and specifically the Great Barrier Reef, which you can see from space. It spans about 2,300 kilometers, about 1,500 miles along the east coast of Australia. It's about the size of Germany. It's the largest continuous reef on the planet, and it's home to almost 150 species of sharks and rays. And if we extend up into Papua New Guinea and the Coral Triangle, we have the whole range of shark number 1 in my Tale of Two Sharks, and that's the epaulette shark. Most of our fieldwork on this species takes place at Heron Island in the southern part of the Great Barrier Reef. but a lab work happening back up in Townsville at James Cook University. So let's check them out. Hopefully this works. Woohoo. All right. So here off of Heron Island is probably one of the best places to find epaulet sharks. It's a small carpet shark that only grows to be a couple feet long. It's distinguished by its patterning and its large circles on the sides of its body called epaulets, hence the name. And the species is really special for many reasons. It's probably made most famous by David Attenborough's documentaries about the Great Barrier Reef, documenting it walking on the reef flats. My team thinks that it's pretty special for some other reasons because it's tolerating some really tough conditions on the reef. These shallow reef flats where this particular species lives, temperatures get quite warm, oxygen levels will fall to zero, carbon dioxide levels will increase, which drops the water pH, and many of these are the conditions that we're predicting for the end of the century with climate change. Yet these particular sharks seem to have no issues hiding in these shallow reef flats, sheltering in these cracks and crevices, and so we thought they'd be a perfect species to investigate and see how they do it. And do they ever? In the laboratory, we've been acclimating epaulet sharks to current day or end of century, year 2100 predicted temperatures and carbon dioxide levels, and testing various aspects of their physiological or athletic performance. And it turns out that these sharks can tolerate 0 oxygen levels for hours, levels that would kill us in minutes. And when we hold these sharks for several months we take them into the future, year 2100, at carbon dioxide levels that we're expecting with ocean acidification, they're able to maintain their metabolic performance, their swimming, their activity, and their sheltering and their food-finding behaviors, which contrasts what we know for other fish species that have been investigated under these same conditions. What we think is some of these other fish species that are affected at the level of olfaction or their sense of smell and even some of their swimming performance is because their neurotransmitters in their brain are affected, but it seems like this species is not. We've also been investigating how this species is responding to elevated temperatures and how they use movement in these shallow reef habitats to choose optimal conditions. And all of this is possible with juveniles and adults, but we got this idea thinking we needed to rewind a little bit. So these sharks develop in eggs that are fertilized internally, and then the mother deposits them on the reef flats where they develop for about 4 to 5 months. During this time, the embryo has to tolerate whatever conditions are happening around it. They can't swim away. And so we can raise these eggs in the laboratory under different climate change conditions, different scenarios, and monitor the health, the growth, the development, tail movements, gill movements, how much oxygen the embryo is consuming, how fast the embryo is consuming the yolk before the embryo hatches. And what we already know is that no matter if the eggs are raised under current day conditions or carbon dioxide levels simulating the year 2100, that this does not affect any of these traits in these embryos, which is really, really interesting. It means that they're tolerant from very, very early on. But what we don't know quite yet is all the ways that they can tolerate increases in temperature and what that's going to affect on their development. And that's some of the work that Carolyn is doing here at the aquarium. But then upon hatch, we can also continue to monitor these things, and we can look at movement patterns, and it turns out that these hatchlings are actually pretty lazy when they hatch. They're pretty clumsy for about a month or so, and we think that it's because they're still using their yolk reserves when they hatch, that they don't need to really search around for food. And so they're not getting those like nice walking movements, nice swimming movements right away. It's taking a little while for them to get these particular movements. So you can say, like, they're quite cute when they actually are moving around. And apparently we had a hatchling here at the aquarium last night, so I heard. So it's pretty exciting for us. So far it seems that we have pretty positive news overall for these shallow sharks, these epaulet sharks, and that they really are sort of a product of their environment, the challenging conditions they already face, living in these cracks and crevices of the shallow reef flats. But we can't really jump to conclusions so quickly. Some of the information about how they are responding to elevated temperatures is a bit alarming. It's little snippets that we're getting so far. When epaulet sharks' eggs are reared under current day temperatures, they hatch normally and they develop their distinct pattern coloration, which becomes even more distinct and remains quite symmetrical as the neonate grows for about 30 days, which is in the bottom panel. And so they've got their namesake epaulet spot on the sides of their bodies. It's round, it's quite defined. However, when the eggs are reared under just +3 degrees Celsius above their average temperatures, the patterning is really changing. The neonates have asymmetrical patterning, a lack of distinctness, a lack of coloration, almost as if the patterns were smudged or like a watercolor painting was smudged with water. And this can have really negative consequences if they're depending on their colors and patterns for camouflage or for mating. And in fact, their MO is hiding. Like, these sharks like to hide. If their critical habitat is lost due to what we're doing to the coastlines, or they have to move to find more hiding places, it could be all over for this epaulet shark. So I wanted to apply some of this knowledge that we've learned about the epaulet sharks to try to understand what shark number 2 in my story is doing in French Polynesia. French Polynesia is a really special place. It represents one of the largest shark sanctuaries on the planet. So sharks cannot be fished or exploited intentionally in any way. And this is a project I started several years ago on the island of Moorea. And my students and I are heading back there in 10 days to begin our 4th season, which is pretty exciting. And we've been posting a lot about this on social media for the past 4 years as well, under the hashtag PhysioSharks, so you can follow along. So the island of Moorea is just off of Tahiti. It's got one main road that circles the island, and the land is only about 80 or so square miles. It's full of lush green mountains. It's a horrible place to work, surrounded by shallow lagoons and mangroves and reef. And over the past several years, we've characterized what we think might be 11 distinct nurseries around this island, where during the months between September and March, mother black-tip reef sharks are pupping. And these pups use these habitats transiently. They're feeding in the evening hours, and we're only just starting to understand how, because the conditions are not always that favorable. We've been monitoring water quality over the past several years, and we know that summer daytime temperatures can reach 34 degrees Celsius, which is getting into like bath water temperatures. Oxygen's dropping to extremely low levels at night. pH is dropping as well. And so our work aims to determine how these conditions will affect these shark pups. And we do this largely by measuring aspects of their athletic performance as well. Some of this is also involving recovery from exercise. Sometimes these pups are being chased by predators, or even though French Polynesia is a shark sanctuary, sometimes these pups are accidentally caught in the fishery, as you can see here in the photo on the right. So we've been characterizing these 11 nursery areas, and I'm just going to take you there and show you what some of these nursery areas look like. We'll go out fishing with gill nets in the evening time and aim to catch these black-tip reef shark pups. That are newly born. We're also characterizing that habitat as well, water quality like temperature and oxygen and pH. Here's 2 of my students looking very happy characterizing some water quality. We've got temperature loggers all throughout the island as well, so we have every 10 minutes what the temperature is doing in some of those areas. And it's just getting quite extreme, really, really warm water conditions for these animals. And so we're collecting these animals off the gill net, getting them off the gill net within a minute, and having a lot of fun as well. And we're taking lots of measurements along the way. We're taking, definitely like all the length, so we can find out how big they are when they're pupped. We're taking DNA samples, we're tagging them so we can find them later. We can even take blood samples. We get a lot of information from their blood samples, and we can analyze it right there in the pickup truck with a kind of a ghetto setup. We are inserting temperature tags inside them as well so that we can monitor the temperatures that they're traversing into along the way. And we're starting to get a lot of data about what these animals are doing. We're monitoring their umbilical scars, so very similar to our belly buttons, which heal very quickly within about a month. So we know if they've got an umbilical scar, they're a fresh baby, a fresh pup. Also their fins, it's like a fingerprint, so that black tip on their fin. This is a respirometry chamber, so we're measuring their recovery from exercise, so that exercise when they're fighting on the gill nets. And we know that that takes about 4 hours, best case scenario, for them to recover from that. So that's a really big piece of information that we're getting from them as well. We can also bring them back to the lab and do some experiments there at the French laboratory where we work. And then we're releasing them back into the wild and monitoring them, because we do have them tagged to see where they go, and even sometimes catching them the next year in some of these areas as well. And it's really important for us to understand how long they're staying in these nursery areas, because just outside the boundaries of the reef there, we have all of the adult sharks, not only more black-tip reef sharks, but sicklefin lemon sharks and really big tiger sharks. And so a lot of predator species that are out there. So we want to know how long they're staying in these nurseries and how they're able to do that, because they're pretty challenging habitats. So all in all, what we're trying to find out is, are these nurseries, they're not super, they're not super hospitable. It's not necessarily where I'd send my children, of a day while I'm working. There's predators, there's challenging conditions, but are they good enough to help confer fitness for these baby reef sharks and protect them from some of these conditions? And now we need to understand how human influence and fishing and climate change are going to affect these nursery areas. And so I'd ask, watch this space. We've got a lot going on there. So that's my tale of two sharks. And I'm hoping that the information that we're gathering about these athletic species and how they're coping with challenging conditions can help us better inform which areas need better protection, which species need better protection, and what the future holds. Thank you.